Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from Kansas Soybean Commission. The Soybean Checkoff. It works for everyone.
I keep reading about engineered corn, but I don't know what that means.
Spring water, purified water, what's the difference?
Is imported beef safe for my family?
Consumers want to know the facts about the products they buy. That's where Real Ag comes in. From plant to plant and from pasture to plate, Kyle Bauer and the Real Ag crew find the facts to help you sort the truth and help you understand Real Ag. Now here's your host, Kyle Bauer.
Pork may be the other white meat, but today we're going to talk about the other red meats. We're talking about sheep, goats, and even the North American bison today on Real Ag. Most Americans eat pork, beef, and chicken for protein. Other cultures, even within the U.S., prefer goats and sheep. Bison has become popular in recent years as a new red meat alternative.
A person that's going to eat buffalo for the first time needs to know a few things about buffalo. First of all, it's going to be a darker red meat. Don't let that spook you. When you cook it, because it is so much leaner, you need to cook it lower heat and for a longer amount of time. And in the industry, the general catchphrase on that is low and slow.
Let's talk about some terms you're going to hear. When a buffalo has a baby, that baby is referred to as a calf. So therefore, the process of having a baby calf is called calving. When the goat has a baby, that baby is referred to as a kid. So therefore, it's called kidding. And when a sheep has a baby, the baby is called a lamb. So that process is called lambing.
Lamb is basically the birthing process of the producing offspring of the sheep, and consequently a baby sheep is also a lamb. They can be a ewe lamb or a ram lamb. The male sheep that's castrated will become a wether. The meat is called lamb also. So consequently, a lamb is a very universal term in the sheep industry.
A female buffalo is called a heifer until she's had a calf. At that point, then she's referred to as a cow. Of course, the calf would be a heifer or a bull, depending on whether it is a male or female. So we've got cows, once they've had calves. A female that hasn't had a calf yet is a heifer. She'd be considered a calf for a year. A bull calf would be a calf for a year. Then you'd have yearlings after that. There'd be a yearling from 1 to 2 years, and then after that they're considered mature from all intents and purposes. A cow or a heifer may have her first calf after 2 years, for sure by 3 years, and a bull might not procreate until 3 years. He's usually a little bit slower.
Let's talk about some reasons that people might raise sheep and goats. First of all, sheep have two different crops. They have the wool, which is harvested in the spring, which has two purposes. First of all, you do get some income from the wool, but secondly, it makes the sheep more comfortable through the warm months. Secondly, of course, you have the meat. Another reason that people may choose to raise sheep and goats is they may feel safer around sheep and goats. They're not nearly as large of an animal, and they might feel more comfortable around the smaller animals. Also, sheep and goats require less acreage per head. So if you have a small acreage, you might be able to have a more economically viable enterprise on your farm with a smaller acreage.
Well, there's lots of reasons that someone chooses to raise sheep. Myself, our family actually had sheep before I was born, and it just was a continuation of a 4-H project. But there's other reasons. There are something that's very easy for a person, even a wife of an operation or kids to do most of the work by themselves.
Actually, it's kind of a funny story. He'd be a great uncle, I guess is what you'd call him. When I was 8, I'd kind of always wanted some goats, and he had a whole bunch of sheep, and he'd went to a sheep sale. And a milking goat came through. And he just showed up to the house one day and said, "I think Joseph needs a goat." And that's how I started. And then down the road, my mom got me some pet goats. I mean, we're talking when I was 8 years old. So then we moved in a standpoint of getting some Spanish goats out of Texas to run brush control. And that was the first big bunch of them. And that was probably when I was 10 or 11. Especially for a younger kid that's starting like I did. My biggest reason for getting goats is they didn't chase me. When I was 8, I would always be helping Dad with cattle, and sure enough, I'd be the one that's getting chased down. Goats were something that I could manage on my own. I could go out and not have to worry about getting hurt. And that was the big push for me. Luckily enough, I had parents that were supportive of it. Some people seem to think that, their dad never had sheep and goats, so they're sure enough never going to have sheep and goats on their ranch. And my advice to them is I started young, and then when I was in high school, I started doing proficiencies on them, doing SAEs through FFA. And if it were not for that, looking back, and not having a professor or a teacher that really pushed me in that direction, I wouldn't be where I was today at all. I'm 23, I have a house and 10 acres, and the best way I can explain it is I was able to show taxes since I was a freshman in high school. I was able to show records, my assets that I already built up since then, and that was what allowed me to get this place. I got on a first-time farm loan, and the rest is history.
Sheep will utilize grasses and weeds that maybe cattle or other livestock won't. So, there's some benefit to, a bigger operation to include sheep into their operation, simply to maybe utilize some of the feedstuffs that aren't being currently utilized.
The only thing that we had to kind of get used to was having guard dogs out with the cattle. We had a couple disasters where, not really disasters, but the dogs would keep the cattle away from them, and the dogs would keep the cattle in a certain certain side of the pasture, and they would just grub the grass down to nothing. So it was some finding out, working with things to figure out how to get them to mingle together and run all as a big herd. I lead the dogs right out with the sheep and goats. They live with them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I just go out every day and I feed the dogs. So as we don't have, since I've got dogs, I haven't had any predator problems.
We do use a llama as a guard animal. Where I grew up, my parents' place, we had some coyote problems and also some bobcat issues as well. But knock on wood, right here we haven't had any predator issues. I've never personally seen it, but I've heard stories of llamas that literally will attack a coyote until it's dead. Just by I've heard kicking, just beating them to death, I guess. I guess the easiest way to do it is to break it down into what you call meat breeds, those that are raised for meat, which would be Suffolks and Hampshires and Dorsets, and then other blackface breeds like Shropshires and Southdowns. Those breeds, like I say, are raised for meat. They do have wool, but their wool isn't as valuable. The wool breeds are like your Columbias and Rambouillets and Merinos. Their wool's a little finer, so it's going to be a little more valuable, used more so in clothing and whatnot. So those breeds of sheep, you do lamb them as well, but you get a little bit of extra benefit for the value of the wool. We harvest ours, do our shearing in the spring. Used to always do it over spring break because my daughters were here to help me, but now I just kind of do it whenever we can fit it into the schedule. Well, I'm going to shear a lamb. Since we've sheared all of our ewes already this spring, we've got some of this lamb would have been born about the 1st of February. You always want to start out with it on its rump and kind of open up as spot. You use your hands and legs to hold the lamb. And you want to keep the skin as tight as you can so you don't nick the skin. Even if you do, the lamb has the natural lanolin in it, in the wool, so a lamb will heal up really quickly, quite simply because of that natural lanolin piece. When you have a full year's worth of growth, it will stay in one piece as long as you can control the animal to not fight against you. And that makes it easier for them when they grade the wool.
It took me a while. About 6 years ago, a neighbor had been trying to talk me into getting some hair sheep. He'd raised goats for a long time, and he had hair sheep also. And to be honest with you, I always kind of thought they looked a little funny. Being from a 4-H standpoint, showing wool sheep and having goats, two different extremes. And you look at a hair sheep, something that's has hair instead of wool. They're not as big as the wool sheep. They have their tails on. To be honest, they almost look goofy to me. Now looking at them, I don't see that as much anymore. I've kind of shot for genetics that I like in them. The reason for mainly switching to them is the guy was willing to make me a really good deal on them to try them out. And once I tried them, the amount of vigor in the lambs being born, the parasite resistance in the ewes. I have about 250 ewes now, and I spot worm about 10 to 15 a year. And for the most part, they just live out on the land, and I just try to manage it the best I can. They're more or less bred for meat. They got a lot more pound for pound muscling throughout their entire body. For all the Muslim population in New York alone, if you were to take all the goats in the United States, that it wouldn't feed them for a week. So we have all this import coming in to help supply the meat demand, but yet you look around in local restaurants and stores and sheep and goats are basically non-existent. So when you get to the highly populated areas that have this high number of Muslim and Spanish population, they seem that if you were able to tap into that market, there shouldn't be any reason why you couldn't make money off it.
We're finding that a lot of people like lamb because it's different, and it's really become popular in farmers markets. The ethnic market is a very strong supporter of lamb as well, and consequently, the need for sheep right now is high. I mean, the lamb market's as high as I've ever seen it in my years of production, and consequently, it's a good time for people to get into the sheep business.
Let's talk about bison, also known as the American buffalo, native to the plains of the United States. Some would say at one point we had as many as 60 million head roaming across the plains, but it reached nearly extinction at the beginning of the 20th century. Those numbers are back on the rise, mostly thanks to ranching operations.
Well, around 1800, the estimates were between 30 and 60 million buffalo were roaming, mainly through the Midwest of the United States. Some of what caused their decline and near extinction was human and wantonness. Some of it was general need. Indians and trappers and people that lived out in this area early killed them for their meat and for their hide and everything else, but there was some wantonness as well where they'd kill them just for the hide and leave the carcass rotting, or even just for the tongue, and there'd be trains come through that would just stop and everybody'd get out and take target practice and just leave the entire animal. Also, I've read that through the 1840s through the 1860s there was an extended drought, and that caused some supply in the grasses, a supply issue with grass, and so they some of them starved, and so there was some of that. And then as more and more settlers came in, the military used the buffalo as a weapon, in the fact that if we can remove the buffalo, because the Indian was so dependent on it for everything, they felt like remove the buffalo, remove the Indian. And so by 1889, by all accounts, there was less than 1,000 buffalo left in the world. By some accounts, there's as few as 22, but most of the counts I see are around 700 to 800. There's two type of bison, two type of buffalo in the North American continent. There's the ones that we all see down here, which is called the plains bison. And then up in Canada, further north, there's a wood bison. And they're up pretty far north. And they don't fare very well if you bring them south. But the plains bison, if you bring it up north, it does all right. They are bovines, and so their gestational periods are the same. A lot of their insides are the same as a cow. You know, that's the nice part about buffalo, is they're a wild animal. They've got all their wild animal instincts. This is their home turf. They're resistant to nearly every disease here, and that's the nice thing about them, is they're wild. They know what to do. They've got all the instincts, and this is where they've always lived, and so they know what to do. And they will go as long as they're in decent health. There's been people that have documented them having a calf in their 35th, 36th year. So they've talked about having 35 calves from a single cow. A mature cow will probably weigh between 1,000 to 1,500 pounds, and a mature bull probably starts about 2,000, generally up to around 2,500. However, the world record is over 3,300. They know what to eat. They eat a little bit more than a cow will. They'll scrounge a little bit more. You can have, basically, wherever your area is, you can have 3 head of buffalo for every 2 head of cow you can run, is what the National Bison Association suggests. They take care of themselves pretty well. I think in the 4 years I've been here, we've had to catch 2 animals that were looking sickly, and we've given them antibiotics. The rest of the time, there's nothing else given to them, no hormones, no nothing. The only other time we have to catch them is in the fall. We catch them to tag the calves, and then to also do a few tests that you have to go to the sale with them, because we sell them in December. They're easier to manage through the course of the year. You can run a few more head per acre than you can with cows, because you can run 3 to 2. And because of their tolerance to things, you're not, my father-in-law has a cattle operation, and he's out pulling calves for a couple months a year. They do it all themselves. That's been bred into them for hundreds, if not thousands of years, that if they couldn't have that calf by themselves, that big baby and probably the cow died with it, and that gene has been weeded out, and that's made the entire herd that much stronger, that much better genetically. In the pasture, generally yes, we've got an extra wire on the top. Out in the pasture though, if they're content, if they've got plenty of water, plenty of food, they don't have any need to roam, they're not going to test the fences. And cross my fingers, in the 4 years I've been here, we've not had one out. Once you start working them and confine them, that's when the fun begins. They're a herd animal, and they're used to wide open spaces. So right away we're doing a couple of things to them. We're compacting them, which they don't like, and then because they're a herd animal, they have a pecking order. And with the pecking order, if the herd bull walks through, the waves part. They get out of his way. If they don't, he takes that as a challenge, and there's likely to be a fight. In the pens and in the corrals, that pecking order can't be observed, and so there's a lot of, they feel like they're being challenged a lot, and so they get to fighting each other. And then there's some of the females, some of the cows, that will walk the fence line with you, just begging you to come over to the other side so they can stick you. They get mad and they just will follow you. Some buy them to start herds. Some buy them because they have a herd that they need to add to. Some buy them. Some come down there and just buy the 2-year-olds because they're looking for butcher-ready animals. The reason we sell ours is because we've got about what we need as far as breeding stock, and so excess breeding stock we take to the sale. It tastes similar to beef. Some people say it's a little bit sweeter. It's got more protein, more iron, more vitamin B12. It's got fewer calories. It's got less fat, and a big kicker is it's very low in cholesterol. So there's a lot of people that eat it for heart reasons. A lot of doctors recommend it for women who need an iron supplement. You can buy it at a lot of the local places where you find your buffalo roaming out on the pasture. We sell it. Most other guys like us sell it from their home or from a couple of stores nearby, something like that. It is getting a little bit more difficult to find these days because for the last year or two, demand has been outpacing supply. So there's actually, the last couple of years, there's been more animals processed for meat than have been brought into herds. So demand is ticking up continually, 10 to 15% a year. And now we're getting to the point where the demand is exceeding the supply. So we're seeing some price shifts like you kind of have with cattle as well. We tan hides, and they're available. They're very warm and they're a lot softer than you might imagine. This last summer I took a head that a man came out and hand-picked down to his Bill and Ted's Nature Museum in Hartner, Kansas, and they're really excited about that, and so all that's got value. And to do that, you have to do it in the winter months, from the end of November through about the middle of February are the best times, because after that, and as we'll see when we go out into the pasture, they start to lose their winter hair, and those follicles will fall out after that point. If we harvest one in the summer, we can still take the head out and let it decompose naturally, and then have the skull. And a lot of people like to use those for either decorations, and a lot of people will paint them up. They're big in Western motifs. If you're going to eat buffalo for the first time, generally you won't notice the difference between buffalo and beef. I tend to notice the difference when I go from eating buffalo to eating a beef hamburger or something if I go out to eat with somebody or go to McDonald's or wherever. Buffalo is more filling than beef. You have to eat less buffalo to feel just as full. And so when you combine that with all of the health benefits of lower fat, lower cholesterol, more protein, iron, and the others, it's kind of a win-win.
We need to be clear that any time meat is bought and sold in the United States, whether that meat is beef or poultry or chicken, or in the case of today's show with bison, goats, and sheep, the USDA has guidelines for the processing of that meat, and it must be inspected either by state or federal inspectors before it can be bought and sold anywhere in the United States. There are no exceptions.
U.S. Department of Agriculture, same as it is for pork and beef. It's a very heavily regulated industry, so consequently your lamb meat is safe because of the regulations involved.
I think it'd be basically the same as like beef. They go through and they check through all the carcasses, make sure there's no lung damage. Scrapies is a big thing in the sheep and goats. I don't know if there's ever been a reported case in the goats, but everyone relates goats to sheep. And I don't even know if there's ever been a case in the United States. But they are very much visually checking that out before anything's butchered. If they have any problems, it's just like beef. They quarantine that animal or product and don't release it out into the public.
That wraps up this episode of Real Ag. We hope the information presented to you here helps you appreciate the options available to you. On behalf of the Real Ag crew, I'm Kyle Bauer, helping you sort the truth and helping you understand Real Ag.
Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from Kansas Soybean Commission. The Soybean Checkoff. It works for everyone.